second thing that I'm going to do is I have a piece of tracing vellum here, and I'm going to test my pen nib to make sure that the ink is flowing. There's nothing more frustrating than starting out a drawing and finding out that the pen nib is clogged or that it doesn't function properly. And you also want to make sure that your ink is thin and flowing. I recently had a demonstration that I was doing, which was very frustrating because I couldn't get the ink to flow and I kept blaming the pen nib. And it actually turned out that it was not the pen nib, it was the ink. The ink had been there for so long that it no longer was flowing properly. It was very thick. So one of the things that I do is I use my chamois cloth and I wipe the back of this off. And I'm going to come in here and test and see if I can get the pen nib to work. And what's really nice is that from the very, very beginning, I'm getting a very nice, even flow from the nib. Just to recap a little bit about how I work, I do not hold my pen as if I'm going to write with it. I actually turn it to the side. I rest it on my middle finger. My pointer finger basically does nothing, and my thumb actually does a lot of the pressing. So as you can see, by pressing harder, the lines are thinner, pressing lighter, and I really like the ability to be able to do that. One of the things that I will do when I'm practicing is I'll practice stopping and starting and joining, because a lot of times as you're inking, you'll find that you run out of ink in the middle of a line, and there's nothing that can be more frustrating than running out of ink. But if you learn to join them up, the line should begin to look seamless. So just like a runner would not just sort of hop out of the car, put on a pair of sneakers, and take off to do the Boston Marathon, I basically would start a warm-up before I would actually go and ink onto my paper or my project. And this little piece of tracing paper will be with me for the duration, because sometimes you may get a clog or something and you may need to adjust it. I actually am seeing a tiny little bit of hair on the end of my pen nib, and it may not be visible to you, but I can see it, and that's going to maybe cause me some trouble later on. All right, I'm going to place this. Now, one of the things that I find that is one of the most important things is to basically work with the curve of your hand, your wrist, when you're doing something. So let's go back to this. My wrist likes to move away from me. I find it so much easier to do this than to do that. As you can see, that line was much more wobbly. And I know that a lot of times people have angst when they're working with pen and ink because they think that they can't make a mistake and they're just really nervous. But I find that if I can get to go into a direction that my hand is most comfortable with, that's going to make it so much easier for me to, rather than fight my body, I can actually work in a way that that my hand is going to feel the most natural. It's going to give me the best looking line, opposed to trying to force my hand to go in a direction that it does not want to go. So there's a little tip for you there. Okay, and I think I got a little bit of the paper in the pen nib. So this chamois cloth is really good. Don't use paper towel or a terry cloth, because what will happen is this pen nib is fairly sharp at the end, and what it'll do sometimes is it'll pick up the hairs from whatever it is that you know, if it's terry cloth or a t-shirt or a paper towel or whatever, you'll end up with little flecks in your pen nib, and then that will create a problem. So one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to rotate my paper. It's going to be very important for me to do that so that I can keep in the direction that my wrist wants to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start inking and see how I progress. I'm going to start out very simply by not worrying about form, but actually coming in and just trying to get the outlines in. One of the things that you have to think about when you're working with Mylar is that it's plastic, and the ink is not absorbed into the paper. So what will happen is you will end up having the ink stay wetter on the surface for a much longer period of time. So I've got to keep working from the left to the right, because if I don't, I'm going to end up putting my hand in the middle of my drawing, and the ink will bleed and make a terrible mess. Whenever I have to stop and start a line, I will begin where I left off by starting very lightly and then pressing. This helps to make it seamless and not look like a mistake. Another thing that I will do is, as I begin to ink up into this section here, I'm going to start in the line very, very lightly and then pull out from the line. This is also something that is very useful. So again, here I come in and pull from here. One of the things that I do when I'm done inking, or I need to take a break, is any ink that is left in the reservoir of the pen nib, I will come in with my chamois and use my thumb and pull that out to keep it clean. A lot of times people will take the pen nib to the sink and use water, but I find that it's much better to just wipe it dry. This way you don't run the risk of leaving it wet and then possibly, I don't know, that it might rust or something like that. So I tend to do this. Okay, so now I've got a nice outline